The shoe was too small. It didn't belong to the boy, and that one small fact, a child's shoe left beside a dumpster on a Tuesday morning, would tear open a secret that a powerful man had spent 11 years trying to bury. His name was Raymond Holt. He was 53 years old, the kind of man whose name appeared on building, plaques, and hospital wings, whose photograph ran in the business section of the Courier Journal every time he donated something large enough to matter. People in Mill Haven, Kentucky called him generous. They called him self-made. They called him a pillar of the community. They didn't know what he'd done. The boy's name was Eli, not the one in the list of names already used, but a different Eli, a quiet 11-year-old with his mother's dark eyes and a habit of humming to himself when he was scared, which was often. He lived with his mother, Corinne, in a 2-room apartment above a dry cleaning shop on Sycamore Street. The smell of chemical solvent had seeped into the walls so long that neither of them noticed it anymore. Corinne worked 2 jobs. Mornings at a diner called the Early Bird, evenings sorting packages at a distribution center off the highway. She came home most nights after Eli was asleep, and she left most mornings before he woke up. She always left a note on the kitchen table. Always the same thing: breakfast is in the oven. Lock the door. I love you more than Tuesday. He didn't know why Tuesday. He'd never asked. Some things between a mother and a child don't need explaining. On the morning this story begins, it was a Wednesday in late October. The sky over Mill Haven had the look of old pewter, flat and cold and promising nothing good. Eli was supposed to be in school at 7:45. He had stopped at the dumpster behind Chen's grocery on Maple because he'd spotted a crate sticking out from the side, and he knew Mrs. Chen sometimes threw out bruised fruit that was still mostly good, and there were 3 days until Corinne got paid, and the refrigerator at home held exactly a carton of eggs and half a jar of peanut butter. He found the fruit: 4 mandarins with soft spots, 2 apples that had gone wrinkly on one side. He put them carefully in his backpack next to his math notebook, and then he saw the wallet. It was lying face down in the gap between the dumpster and the brick wall of the building, the kind of wallet that costs more than Corinne's weekly grocery budget, dark brown leather, thick and new-smelling, with a silver clasp on the side. Eli picked it up with both hands the way you'd pick up something fragile. He turned it over. He did not open it right away. He stood there in the cold with his breath making small clouds in the air, and he thought about his mother's face. He thought about the note on the kitchen table. He thought about the eggs and the peanut butter. Then he opened the wallet. There was cash inside. A lot of cash. He counted it the way his 3rd-grade teacher, Mrs. Paulson, had taught him to count bills. Largest denomination first, smoothed flat, stacked neat. When he finished, he counted again because the first number didn't seem real. $4,200. He stood very still. $4,200 would pay 3 months of rent. It would buy a winter coat for his mother, the one she'd been looking at in the window of Marchetti's on 5th Street for 2 years, and always walked past without stopping. It would buy groceries. It would buy the inhaler his mother sometimes went without because the copay was $60 and $60 was $60. Eli's hands were shaking slightly. He put the cash back in the wallet. He closed the clasp, and in the front pocket of the wallet, behind a dry cleaning receipt and a folded business card, he found a driver's license: Raymond G. Holt, 1220 Haverford Drive, Mill Haven, KY. He knew that name. Everybody in Mill Haven knew that name. The Holt Community Recreation Center was 3 blocks from his school. There was a Raymond G. Holt Scholarship Fund plaque in the library that he walked past every Tuesday when his class went for reading hour. Eli put the wallet in his jacket pocket and walked to school. He didn't tell anyone, not his teacher, not his best friend Cody, not the lunch monitor, Mrs. Patton, who sometimes slipped him an extra roll when the line was short. He sat through math and reading and a social studies quiz about westward expansion, and the whole time the wallet sat in his jacket pocket like something alive, pressing against his ribs. After school, instead of going home, he walked to 1220 Haverford Drive. He had never been to that part of Mill Haven. The houses on Haverford Drive were set back from the road behind iron gates and old trees, the kind of houses that had more windows than his whole building had rooms. He stood outside gate number 1220 for a long time, reading the intercom panel 3 times over before he pressed the button. A woman's voice answered, professional, a little suspicious. "Yes, my name is Eli," he said. I found Mr. Holt's wallet this morning. Behind Chen's grocery on Maple. I came to return it. Silence. Hold on. He waited 4 minutes. He counted. Then the gate made a mechanical sound and swung inward, and he walked up a long driveway lined with boxwood hedges that someone had trimmed into perfect spheres. Raymond Holt met him at the front door. He was a tall man, the kind of tall that still carries itself straight in middle age. Silver at the temples, jaw that looked like it had once been sharp and was softening now at the edges. He wore a button-down shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, the kind of casual that costs money. He looked at the boy on his doorstep, and something crossed his face that Eli couldn't quite read. Something fast and complicated, like a door opening and closing, before you could see what was on the other side. "You found my wallet," Raymond said. "Yes, sir." Eli held it out with both hands. Raymond took it. He opened it, checked the clasp, looked at the cash. His expression didn't change. "How much is in here?" $4,200, Eli said. "I counted it twice." Raymond looked at him for a long moment. "You counted it?" "Yes, sir." "And you brought it back?" "Yes, sir." "Why?" It was a strange thing to ask. Eli considered it seriously, the way he considered things. "Because it's yours," he said finally. Raymond was quiet. He looked at the boy, really looked at him, and Eli had the unsettling sense of being seen more clearly than he was comfortable with. Not in a frightening way, more like the way a person looks at something they recognize but can't quite place. A melody they know but can't name. "Come inside," Raymond said. "I'll get you something warm to drink." "I should get home," Eli said. 5 minutes, Raymond said. "Please." Something in the word please was not what Eli expected from a man whose name was on library plaques. It didn't sound like a powerful man being polite. It sounded like a man who needed something. Eli came inside. The kitchen was large and warm and smelled like coffee and faintly cinnamon. A woman named Berta. The housekeeper, Eli would later learn, who had worked for Raymond for 14 years, poured him a cup of hot cocoa without being asked and set a plate of shortbread cookies on the counter, and then disappeared with the practiced invisibility of someone who understood when a room needed to hold only 2 people. Raymond sat across from Eli at the kitchen island. He set the wallet between them. "Where do you live, son?" Ellie told him. "Sycamore Street above the dry cleaning shop." "Who do you live with?" "My mom." Corinne. Raymond's hands wrapped around his coffee mug went very still, just for a second. Then they relaxed, and he took a sip, and he looked at the countertop in front of him, as if something there required careful attention. "How old are you?" he asked. 11, Eli said. "I'll be 12 in February." Raymond nodded slowly. He didn't look up from the counter. "Your mom," he said carefully. "What does she look like?" It was a strange question. Eli tilted his head. "Why?" Raymond finally looked up. There were things moving behind his eyes, old things, Eli sensed, things that had been sitting still for a long time and had just been jostled loose. "Humor an old man," he said quietly. "She has dark hair," Eli said, "and she's kind of short. She has a scar on her left hand from when she was little and she touched a stove." He paused. "Why?" Raymond put his coffee mug down. He pressed both hands flat on the counter, and he looked at the boy in front of him the way a person looks at the last piece of a puzzle when they're almost afraid to set it in place. "Does your mother have a sister?" he asked. "Older? Named Patricia?" Ellie felt something shift in the room. Not the temperature. Something else. "She doesn't talk about her family," Eli said. "No," Raymond said, more to himself than to the boy. "She wouldn't." He stood up from the stool and walked to the window above the sink. He stood there for a while, looking out at the boxwood hedges in the fading afternoon light. When he turned back, his face had changed in a way Eli couldn't fully describe. Older, heavier, like something he'd been carrying had gotten heavier instead of lighter. "I need to tell you something," Raymond said, "and I need you to hear it as something true, even though it's going to sound like something that belongs in a story." Ellie waited. Raymond pulled out a chair at the kitchen table, not the island, the actual table in the corner by the window, and he sat down in it heavily, the way old men sit down when they're not just tired from the day, but from something longer than a day. He gestured at the chair across from him. Eli sat. 11 years ago, Raymond said, "I made a decision that I told myself was practical. I've told myself that ever since." He paused. "It wasn't practical. It was cowardice." He told the boy what he'd done. 11 years ago, Raymond Holt had been different. Not a different species of man, but an earlier version of himself, one not yet worn down into something more honest. He had been building his real estate company from the third floor up, all forward motion and quarterly projections, and he had been engaged to a woman named Vivian Marsh from the marshes of Lexington, whose family name meant things in Kentucky that Raymond's didn't yet. Vivian was elegant and organized and had a talent for social architecture. She knew exactly who to seat next to whom and why. She had helped him become the kind of man whose name went on buildings. That same year, he had also been meeting quietly for 7 months with a young woman named Corinne Aldridge, a paralegal at a firm downtown, 24 years old, sharp-witted and stubborn, and the kind of person who laughed at things other people didn't notice were funny. It wasn't a grand affair. It was two people who liked each other in a way that had no practical future, and they both knew it. When Corinne told him she was pregnant, Raymond had done the thing he would spend a decade being ashamed of. He'd panicked, he'd calculated. He'd chosen Vivian and the company and the trajectory he'd been building, and he'd handed Corinne a check and a speech about fresh starts and clean breaks that he'd been disgusted by even as he was delivering it. Corinne had taken neither the check nor the speech. She'd walked out. He'd married Vivian 4 months later. The business had grown. The plaques had gone up on the buildings, and somewhere on Sycamore Street, in an apartment above a dry cleaning shop, a boy had been growing up with his mother's dark eyes and, Raymond now saw with a certainty that settled into his chest like cold water, his own jaw, the jaw that had once been sharper, that was softening now with age. He stopped talking. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a car passed on Haverford Drive. Eli sat across from him without moving. His face was doing something complicated. Not anger, not yet. Something more like the look of a person doing arithmetic on numbers that don't add up to anything they've seen before. "My mom doesn't know I'm here," Eli said finally. "I know. She's going to come home tonight and find my note. What did your note say? That I had to do something important and I'd be back before dinner?" Eli looked at the table. "I didn't know it was going to be this important." Raymond was quiet for a moment. Then, very softly, he said, "Neither did I." What happened next was not simple. Nothing about the next 3 weeks was simple, and anyone who tells you that the truth, once spoken, just fixes things like a reset button has never actually had to sit in a room while the truth arrives and watch what it does to the people in the room. Corinne did not take it well. That was an understatement. When Eli got home that evening, Raymond had insisted on driving him, waited outside in the car, did not come to the door. Corinne was already there, still in her diner apron, heating water on the stove for pasta. She read his face the way mothers read their children's faces, which is to say immediately and completely. "What happened?" she said. It was not a question. He told her. She stood at the stove with her hand on the handle of the pot for a long time without turning around. When she finally turned, her face was the face of trying very hard to stay level, the way you try to carry something full without spilling it. "Ellie," she said, "go to your room." "Mom, please," she said, quietly, firmly. The way she said things when she meant them entirely. He went. He could not hear what she did after that. Later he would learn from Berta, who would eventually become someone in his life, though he didn't know that yet, that Corinne sat in the kitchen for a long time, and that she cried, and that the crying was not the soft kind, but the kind that comes from 11 years of something you never fully let yourself feel, and that after the crying she washed her face at the kitchen sink, and she reheated the water, and she made the pasta, and she called Eli out of his room, and they ate dinner together without discussing any of it. She was that kind of woman. Raymond did not appear again for 5 days. On the 5th day, a letter arrived, handwritten on plain paper, not letterhead. Eli saw it on the table when he came home from school. He didn't read it. It wasn't his to read. Corinne read it after dinner while he pretended to do homework. She read it twice. She set it on the table. She looked at the wall for a while. "He wants to meet," she said, not to Eli exactly, more to the air in front of her. "Are you going to?" She was quiet for a long time. "I want to be angry at him," she said finally. "And I am. I'm very angry." She paused. "But you returned his wallet, and I raised you to know that what you do and what he did are 2 different categories of thing, and I am not going to let his choices define yours." She folded the letter and held it in both hands. "We're going to figure this out together, okay?" "Okay," Eli said. She looked at him. Her eyes were doing something complicated too. The same look he'd seen in Raymond's eyes, he realized, the look of someone setting down something heavy. "I'm proud of you," she said, "for returning the wallet, for doing the right thing even when you didn't have to." "It wasn't that hard," he said. "Yes, it was," she said. "That's why I'm proud of you." The meeting between Corinne and Raymond happened on a Saturday morning in a coffee shop on 4th Street, neutral territory, public enough to keep it practical. Eli was not there. He waited at home with the television on and didn't watch it. They talked for 2 hours. What was said between them in that coffee shop belonged to them, and this story will respect that. What mattered, what reached Eli in the days and weeks that followed, were the results. Raymond had hired a family law attorney. He had made clear that he was not interested in disruption, that he had no designs on removing Eli from his mother's life or undoing what Corinne had built, that the only thing he wanted, if it was wanted in return, was the chance to be present, to be known, to stop being a fact that was being lived around instead of lived with. The attorney drew up papers. Paternity was confirmed, though neither of them had doubted it. There were discussions about support, about legal acknowledgement, about the kind of things that courts deal in when families exist in complicated shapes. And then there was the other thing. 2 weeks after that Saturday coffee shop meeting, Raymond's accountant sent a document to the family law attorney, who forwarded it to Corinne. It was not a dramatic document. It did not announce itself as the thing that was going to change things. It was 4 pages of financial information, and on page 3 was a notation about a trust account that Raymond had established 11 years ago, established quietly, amended quietly, maintained quietly, in the name of a minor identified only as C.A.'s child, which had been his way, in the guilty arithmetic of a man who couldn't face what he'd done directly, of acknowledging what he owed without actually facing it. The account had been collecting interest for 11 years. When Corinne saw the number, she called her attorney back and asked her to read it again. Then she sat down. She told Eli that night. She told him the number. He stared at her. "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means," she said carefully, "that you can go to any college in this country, and I can stop working 2 jobs. She paused. "And I might be able to buy a winter coat." He didn't fully understand all of it. He was 11. But he understood the part about the coat. "Marchetti's," he said. She laughed. It was the best laugh he'd heard from her in a long time, the kind that came from the chest and surprised her. "Marchetti's," she said. The weeks that followed were not the end of complicated. Raymond entered their lives carefully, the way you enter a room where something fragile is resting, not absent, not overwhelming, finding his footing slowly. He and Corinne were never friends in the easy sense. The history between them was real, and it had done real damage, and that didn't simply heal because the truth was out. But they were, and this was the word Corinne used, months later when someone asked her about it, civil, more than civil, careful with each other. And sometimes on the good days, something more than careful. Eli met Raymond twice in October, 3 times in November. They went to a Wildcats game. Raymond had season tickets, had offered them awkwardly, and Eli had accepted awkwardly, and the game itself had been the least awkward part of the afternoon. They ate hot dogs and argued about whether the ref had made the right call in the second quarter, and Eli was better at arguing than Raymond had expected, which Raymond found himself pleased about in a way he didn't know how to explain. He told Berta about it that evening when he got home. "He argued with me," Raymond said, as if reporting a minor miracle. Berta, who had known Raymond for 14 years and was not easily impressed by him, looked up from the stove. "Did he win?" Raymond considered this. "On points," he said. Berta smiled and went back to stirring. In December, Raymond attended Eli's school winter concert. He sat in the 3rd row, 3 seats from Corinne, and they both watched a boy in a slightly too big white dress shirt play 3rd clarinet in O Holy Night with the kind of focus and seriousness that is, in an 11-year-old, indistinguishable from joy. When it was over and the auditorium clapped, Raymond clapped too. He clapped longer than was strictly necessary. On the way out, Corinne stopped beside him for a moment. "He practiced that for 6 weeks, she said. "I could tell," Raymond said. "You could not," she said. He almost smiled. "No," he said, "I couldn't." She almost smiled back. That was the beginning of something. Not a family in the storybook sense, not the reunion of something lost. Something different. Something with edges and history and hard work in it, but something real. On the Saturday before Christmas, Raymond drove to Marchetti's on 5th Street and bought a winter coat. He'd asked Berta what size, and she'd asked him how he'd possibly know a woman's coat size, and he'd told her he was going to ask the sales associate. And Berta had told him that was the first sensible thing he'd said in weeks. It was a dark green wool coat with a wide collar and the kind of lining that makes a difference in a Kentucky winter. He had it wrapped, even though he felt slightly absurd asking the woman at the counter to wrap a coat. He left it on Corinne's doorstep on Christmas Eve morning with a card that said only, "For taking good care of him." He did not sign it. He didn't need to. Corinne found it when she opened the door to get the newspaper. She stood in the doorway for a long time in her bathrobe with the cold air coming in. Then she brought the box inside and opened it, and she held the coat up in the morning light, and she put it on over her bathrobe and stood in her kitchen wearing a beautiful coat over flannel pajamas, and she laughed again, that chest laugh, that surprised laugh. Eli came out of his room, sleep-faced, alarmed by the sound of laughing at 7 in the morning. He stopped in the door. His mother was standing in the kitchen in a green wool coat over her pajamas, laughing by herself. "Mom?" he said. She turned and looked at him, and her eyes were bright and she was still laughing, and she held her arms out wide so the coat spread open like wings. "Merry Christmas, baby," she said. He crossed the kitchen and went into her arms, into the smell of wool and cold air and her, and she held him the way she'd held him since he was small enough to fit entirely against her chest. Outside, Millhaven was waking up on Christmas morning. The dry cleaning shop below them was dark and still. Somewhere down Sycamore Street, someone had put lights in their window that blinked slowly, steadily, like a heartbeat. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Some things between a mother and a child don't need explaining. The wallet had been returned. The truth had come out. And on Sycamore Street, in an apartment that smelled faintly of chemical solvent, and always would, a boy who had made the harder choice on a cold October morning stood in his mother's arms and understood. Not in words, but in the way you understand things that live in the body rather than the mind, that what you do when no one is watching, when the refrigerator is almost empty and the cash is in your hands and no one would ever know, is the thing that tells you who you are. He'd counted the money twice and brought it back. That was everything.